Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to have the newest interview with John Turner. This book is just coming out June 17th. I'm coinciding with the book's release on Amazon. So I was lucky enough to get a copy. And you know what? You can get one too. Go to gospeltangents.com/contest. You could win this autographed copy right here. It's a fantastic book. So we're going to dive into the life of Joseph Smith, of course, with John Turner. He's a professor out on the East Coast. I'll let him introduce himself more in a second here. And also, he's also the author of Brigham Young, Pioneer Prophet. And we're going to hit some of that as well. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm excited to have an amazing East Coast scholar on the show. Could you go ahead and tell us who you are and where you teach?
I'm John Turner. I teach at George Mason University, which is in Northern Virginia, not too far outside of D.C. But right now, I'm at the University of Utah Marriott Library. So it's great to be here in person with you, Rick.
All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate this. So can you just give us a little bit of your academic history? Where did you get your bachelor's, master's, PhD, that kind of stuff?
Sure. I did my undergraduate degree at Middlebury College in Vermont.
Oh, wow.
Way up
New England there.
Well, I grew up outside of Rochester, New York.
Oh, okay.
My wife's a New Englander. I met her at Middlebury. She's from Boston.
Mm-hmm. Red Sox, Yankees?
Red Sox, but she's not avid.
And you?
I actually root for the Atlanta Braves.
Oh, how'd that happen?
Because I grew up watching
TBS.
TBS. I don't follow them all that closely now, but I don't think with sports you should ever let your old attachments go. You have to stick with them. I majored in history and German as an undergrad, then pursued
history and German?
Yeah,
not German history. But
I actually did mostly European history then, but when I went to graduate school at the University of Notre Dame, I did my PhD in U.S. history.
Oh, wow.
Partly, it's so much easier to come to places like Utah to do research than to fly over to Europe. Kind of partway through my PhD, I took a break from my program and did a Master's of Divinity at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. I wasn't quite sure whether I felt called to ministry or to academia. Actually, pretty much as soon as I started, I realized I'm actually feel really at home in the classroom as opposed to the sanctuary or the pulpit. But I think I learned a lot about both the history of Christian theology and other aspects of ministry that I think has helped me write with a little bit more both information and sensitivity about religious experience, doctrine. So I actually think that little detour for me was helpful in the long run.
Oh, interesting. Were you there with Patrick Mason? He was at Notre Dame.
I was there with Patrick Mason, with Matt Groh.
Oh.
Actually, meeting them, those were among the experience that sparked my interest in the history of the Latter-day Saints, because I had never really had any extended, friendship or conversation with Latter-day Saints. But Patrick and Matt, they are extremely winsome and just engaging personalities. And I was focusing on the history of religion in the United States. So it's easy to take an interest in the Latter-day Saints story, which for me also is a bit of local history, having grown up on the east side of Rochester, New York, not too far from Palmyra.
Where it all began.
Right, where it all began. And I'd never really thought about that growing up. It wasn't something that one really heard about. But then when I realized this was also local history for me, it seemed like a great opportunity to learn about a tradition other than my own. And I found it fascinating and I got hooked.
Yeah. So was it hooked at Notre Dame? Is that where you got hooked?
Not exactly. So I wrote my dissertation on American evangelicalism after 1945. I was really interested in the evangelical spaces that had really been formative in my own life. I wanted to understand their history. I was also interested in the intersection of evangelicalism and conservative politics. So that was my dissertation. And then I decided, when I was contemplating a second project, I thought, I don't want to just study my own tradition. I want to learn new things. And a great way of learning new things as a historian is to research and write about them. So even if one doesn't have the deep background in a subject, you just learn so much by taking on something new. So that I initially thought about writing about the intersection of Mormonism and conservative politics in the United States.
Matt Harris does a lot of that.
Right. This was back in 2007, 2008. So it would have been good timing with Mitt Romney's runs for the White House. And as I started to think about that potential project, I began reading up on the earlier history of the church. And you'll often today hear Mormon history people say, well, we need more people studying the 20th century or other parts of the world. Both of those things are true. But for me, when I started reading about the Joseph Smith and Brigham Young eras, it was so fascinating. And so I just wanted to learn more. And it turned out the church was making sources from those time periods accessible to scholars increasingly. And I ended up plunging into writing a biography of Brigham Young.
Yeah, which I have right here. It's fantastic. I just finished this book, by the way. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
So, it's funny to me. I know you've written about the Mormon Jesus as well. So that's 3 Mormon books from a non-Mormon.
I'm a Trinitarian. So, yeah.
Does that mean you're done, or are you going to keep going? Or James Strang, or,
I don't know. I don't have a planned next project. I think it takes all of myself to get a book done, and then to try to do all the things that are involved with persuading people to read it. So I'm pretty single-minded when I'm working on something.
Okay.
I have historian friends who have, they sort of have a list of 3 or 5 projects that they're working on in order, and they really start the next one before the first one's done. But I'm sort of one thing at a time, and I don't know what I'm going to do next.
I've been curious, so this is really fun. I really enjoyed your Brigham Young book, and I just got your. So I'm lucky because Benchmark Books has The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet, Joseph Smith, out now, even though it's not out on Amazon until June 17th. So I've been trying to get through it. And I guess, I'm just curious because, I'm a Latter-day Saint. And so I don't think I would dare take on a whole new biography. Is it different when you're coming from outside the faith, that you're just like, oh, what the heck, come and do it?
Well, it is different. I think there's no, if you're not a Latter-day Saint, obviously you can absolutely just say what you think and share your conclusions, and you don't have to worry about
communicated.
You don't have to worry about an ecclesiastical reaction. Besides getting excommunicated, you don't have to worry about how is this maybe going to disrupt, my life in the church or my relationships. I think, yeah. So I know. There wasn't any reason for me not to write the biography. I think it was a really good time to take on a Joseph Smith biography. This is right on the heels of the Joseph Smith Papers project. And I always lavish a lot of praise on the Joseph Smith Papers project. It's fantastic. It's such a great resource for anybody writing about Joseph Smith or the Joseph Smith time period, not just because it makes accurate transcriptions and images of the relevant sources available, but because the staff there has so thoroughly and impeccably annotated and placed all of those documents in context. So I found that enormously useful. That was a huge head start. It made my task a lot easier. And for me, probably there were two primary motivations for returning to Joseph Smith a number of years after having written about Brigham Young. Number one, writing about Brigham Young, in a way, it was simpler. It was really challenging because of the volume of sources. There's just mountains of material.
For Brigham Young or Joseph Smith?
For Brigham.
Okay.
Just exponentially.
More than Joseph Smith?
Oh, much, huger amount of material
Oh, wow.
to deal with. I mean, if you think about the number of sermons of Brigham Young for which we have records and transcripts compared to Joseph Smith, it must be 20 times the material.
Oh, really?
Number of letters, signed letters by Brigham Young, probably, again, 20 or 50 times the volume of material. But two things were real motivations for me. Number one, writing about Brigham Young, I didn't have to engage the foundational questions that one might engage when writing about Joseph Smith. So I didn't have to worry about whether or not Joseph Smith had golden plates, whether or not Joseph Smith actually received messages from God or Jesus Christ. I didn't have to think about Joseph's in any depth, Joseph's motivations, say, for plural marriage. Brigham Young was a fervent believer in Joseph Smith, in the Book of Mormon, in the Church of Christ that became the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in the doctrine of plural marriage. So a lot of those foundational things were one could simply explain or sort of take for granted when writing about Brigham. With Joseph, I felt this was an opportunity and a challenge to return to that, that foundational time period of the tradition and engage some hard questions that I think historians writing about Joseph Smith need to engage. And then secondly, Joseph Smith, I thought Brigham Young was an enormously fun figure to write about. But Joseph Smith, he's a great biographical subject. Number one, he's a mirthful, colorful man. He's good copy, right? Brigham Young was too. He's just so energetic and dynamic. I mean, his public life is 15 years, essentially. And there's so much packed into it. It needs to be a really fast-paced story. So for me,
which yours was.
I tried to make it fast-paced.
Yeah.
Because I think that's in keeping with the spirit of Joseph's life. So it was so fun. I didn't want to lose out on the chance of writing a Joseph Smith biography.
Yeah, well, it was fantastic. Do you think the volume of Brigham Young is so much greater because he was the prophet for 30 years, whereas Joseph was just 15? So it's just kind of a longevity thing. Is that why the sources were so much more?
Well, it is that because, right, I mean, he lives a much longer life, but also record keeping advances. So, for instance, there are a lot more materials about Joseph Smith in the early 1840s than about Joseph Smith in the early 1830s. The church takes record keeping more seriously. There are more systematic efforts to transcribe what happens at meetings and to make transcripts of Joseph's discourses. So that's simply more advanced by the time Joseph succeeds Brigham. And then also Brigham, in his capacity as governor and superintendent of Indian affairs, there's additional opportunities for the creation of records. So yeah, longevity and more intensive record keeping equal a mountain of archival sources.
Oh, very good. I'm trying to decide if Can we talk about Brigham Young a little bit? Because I would love to do that.
We can talk about anything you want to talk about. But it has been more than 15 years since I wrote that book. Or it's been about 15
Yeah.
years since I wrote that
And
book.
I just read it, so it's fresh out my
Yeah.
mind. Let me just ask you, I think the one big question, Barbara Brown and Rick Turley just came out with a new book, Vengeance is Mine. It's won a lot of awards. It's a fantastic book. And I know the late Will Bagley, one of his big contentions with the Mountain Meadows Massacre was there was a cover-up. And Turley and Brown have gone through and really have a pretty novel. Of course, it came out after your book. The second book came out after your book. Are you? I'm just curious because Will was sure there was a cover up and that Brigham was involved and that Brigham ordered it, but he doesn't really have any evidence. And Barbara and Rick don't really don't really view it as Brigham Young ordering it for sure. Do you have what's your opinion on that?
So, first of all, I love their book, Vengeance is Mine, despite the sober nature of the subject matter.
It's very
And
sober.
to be honest, when it came out, I didn't especially want to read another book on the Mountain Meadows Massacre. It's not a fun subject to think about and read about. I thought theirs was an extremely well researched and well written book. And so I was really glad that I read it. So
Mhm.
if any of your listeners haven't read Vengeance in Mine, I'd wholeheartedly recommend it. So there's two questions, and you were primarily focused on the second one. The first is did Brigham Young order the Mountain Meadows Massacre? Secondly, did Brigham Young cover it up? So in my biography of Brigham Young, I argue contra Will Bagley that not only is there not evidence that Brigham Young ordered the massacre, the evidence that exists is exculpatory, exonerating. So, I mean, he sends a letter to southern Utah in the midst of the standoff and siege that become the massacre. Brigham Young's instructions are to leave the immigrants alone. I don't I think it's very hard to take that and reason one's way to Brigham Young ordered that mass murder. I do assign a fair amount of blame to Brigham for the circumstances that made the massacre possible. I think his rhetoric and policies during August of 1857 created a situation in which Latter-day Saints in southern Utah decided to perpetrate this massacre. I also, just on a side note, I do think one additional reason for the attack on that wagon train was simply greed. These are impoverished settlers in southern Utah. It's a wealthy wagon train with a lot of livestock. So there's that motivation as well. But did Brigham Young order the Mountain Meadows Massacre? My answer is a pretty clear no. Secondly, did Brigham Young cover it up? It's been a long time since I've looked at all of that evidence in any detail, and I enjoyed Vengeance is Mine, but I can sort of only remember that in broad strokes as well. I would be a little bit less sanguine about Brigham Young's response to it. I'm not saying those authors are sanguine. I think Brigham Young at times expressed um, I don't know, satisfaction or at least a lack of regret for the massacre. I think he was not eager for either an ecclesiastical investigation or for criminal investigations. Um, and there are a number of instances in which outside U.S. officials are appointed as judges in Utah, and they want to investigate that and a host of other um, alleged, other crimes and alleged crimes. And Brigham Young's first priority is to protect his people from um, outside interference and possible destruction. And so he's certainly not eager for any alleged misdeeds in Utah to be investigated. So I don't know. I can't really weigh in on that question at this point in any more sophisticated way. But I'm really grateful for a number of historians who've taken the time to examine those 20 years after the massacre in great detail and who have poured into um, transcripts from the John D. Lee trials and many other sources. There's a ton of information about those years now, which it is just a testimony to what diligent and skillful and committed and objective historians can do.
I know that, Barbara and Rick rightly deserve a lot of credit, but kind of the unsung hero is LaJean Carruth. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about her role with what she's helped Barbara and Rick with?
So, well, first of all, LaJean's a good friend of mine.
Okay.
And she's a real treasure to anyone working on the general subject of early Utah history. LaJean has the ability to read Pittman shorthand, and so my friendship with LaJean goes back to when I was doing research on my Brigham Young biography.
Okay.
Because I encountered a number of documents that included some Pittman shorthand. And, often in a collection known as the General Church Minutes, in which there are scores of reports written by Thomas Bullock about, all sorts of deliberations among Brigham Young and his associates. It's a fantastic source. And sometimes Bullock would use a series of abbreviations when making a transcript. And I could kind of figure out what the main abbreviations were and make sense of them. Felt like really fun detective work. But then sometimes one would encounter a document that was entirely in Pittman shorthand. Well, I couldn't get anywhere with that. And LaJean is one of the few people out there who can. So I got to know her, and she helped me decode a number of sources for my biography. She's also made transcripts from the shorthand notes that George D. Watt made of a large number of Brigham Young sermons and sermons by other early Utah Latter-day Saint leaders. And then, as you mentioned, LaJean also did extensive work. I think it was on the John D. Lee trial transcript.
Right, she did. She actually said she got PTSD from it because it was so awful.
Yeah, no, she's told me that. So, so she's lived with some of those. She's lived with that horrific event for quite a few years.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think of LaJean as I don't think it'd be fair to say she's an unsung hero of Mormon history and early Utah history, because I'm not the only person who sings her praises, but they can't be sung enough.
I agree. Yeah, did you have that issue with Joseph Smith as far as Pittman shorthand or other things like that? Everything was just in longhand, so it's easy to see. Okay.
Yeah. Not that was not one of the challenges.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. John Turner from George Mason University. He's the author of Joseph Smith, The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet. So go to gospeltangents.com/contest. You could win the book behind me right there. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about the different Joseph Smith biographies, and I'm going to ask John to rank them.
No, I'm not going to rank them because especially if it involves a number of people that I like.
Well, very good.
I mean, I like my own biography the most. So, yeah.
So this one's number one right here. It's also the newest. Thanks for listening, and I hope you continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.